You're watching Laura Collins, the channel where we don't just follow the war, we break down exactly how it's being fought, one mission at a time. I'm Laura Collins, and today's breakdown is honestly one of the most jaw-dropping stories to come out of this entire conflict. We're talking about a Ukrainian strike mission that didn't just hit its target, it used Russia's own most powerful electronic weapon to find it. Before we get into it, if you're new here and you love deep, detailed military breakdowns that actually make sense, hit that subscribe button right now. Every single week, we're pulling apart operations that the mainstream coverage barely scratches the surface of. And if you've got a take on today's topic, I want to hear it in the comments. Seriously, some of the best analysis I've ever read has come from this community, so don't hold back. Now buckle in, because today we are walking through the night. Ukraine turned Russia's most sophisticated jamming system into a guided missile for their own drones. Let's get into it. It's 12:15 in the morning, and somewhere in Ukraine, a drone operator is running what should have been a clean, efficient, deep strike mission against Milarovo Air Base. The plan was solid on paper. The execution was already underway. And then his screen exploded with electromagnetic interference so overwhelming it looked like someone had pointed a solar flare directly at his monitors. Russia's Pole 21 jamming grid had just kicked into maximum power, flooding a 50-mile radius with electronic chaos specifically engineered to knock GPS-guided weapons completely off course and send them tumbling uselessly into open fields. What followed was not a mission collapse. It was a transformation. What started as a precision strike turned into something far more interesting, a survival race against physics, electronic warfare, and the clock all at once. The operator ran a rapid drift calculation in his head and came up with a brutal number: 6 minutes. He had 6 minutes before the remaining drones in his package wandered so far off their intended flight path that no amount of correction would get them back on target. 6 minutes to do something that Russia would never expect, something that would later redefine how the entire world thinks about electronic warfare and drone navigation in a contested environment. To understand why this moment mattered so much, you need to understand what Milarovo actually was. This was not just some random airfield. Just the previous night, Russia had launched 171 drones from this exact location. Around 100 Shahed kamikaze drones had screamed across the border into Ukrainian territory, targeting cities, targeting infrastructure, targeting civilians. Milarovo was the hub, the brain, the place where Russia felt completely safe coordinating those nightly swarms, tucked behind layers of defense so deep that most military planners would have looked at the target package and quietly suggested picking something easier. Ukraine was not in the business of picking easier targets. They were hunting the source. The administrative command building at Milarovo was the nerve center for southern Russia's Shahed operations, and reaching it meant punching through one of the most layered air defense networks Russia had built anywhere along the front. Let's walk through exactly what Ukraine was flying into, because the scale of the problem is what makes the solution so extraordinary. First and most prominently, there was an S-400 battery positioned on elevated ground to the northeast of the main runway. That system's radar sweeps 250 miles in every direction simultaneously and can track up to 300 individual targets at once. It is not a system that misses things. It is not a system you sneak past on a lucky night. It is a persistent, rotating eye in the sky that was designed from the ground up to make missions exactly like this one fail before they even get close. Surrounding the perimeter, 4 Panzer S-1 systems formed a close-in kill ring. These units are specifically engineered to destroy exactly the kind of low, slow, small targets that Ukraine favors. Twin 30mm autocannons capable of putting out devastating volumes of fire at close range, backed up by surface-to-air missiles that cost upwards of $1 million each. They are vicious, reactive, and very hard to saturate. Then comes the layer that truly defined this entire engagement: the Pole 21 electronic warfare system. Covering a full 50-mile bubble around the base, it pumps jamming energy across every GPS frequency band, creating a zone where drone navigation doesn't just degrade. It fails completely and without warning. Russia had every right to feel confident behind that grid. They had stacked the odds aggressively in their favor. What they hadn't accounted for was Ukraine's willingness to turn those odds completely inside out. At 6 in the evening, along the Sumy Oblast border, the operation officially began. A swarm of 20 Lyuty drones, each one weighing in at 60 pounds at takeoff and carrying a 165-pound warhead, lifted off into the freezing darkness and immediately dropped low, 400 feet above ground level, hugging river valleys, riding the natural cover of ridge lines, tree lines, and terrain features that kept them below the radar horizon of everything Russia had pointed at the sky. These were the real weapons, but they were not going in alone, and they were not going in first. From hidden launch sites near Sumy and Kharkiv, Ukraine simultaneously released 30 UJ-22 decoy drones into the night, $12,000 each, loud, radar reflective, and programmed to scream high-value target on every Russian detection system in range. What happened next was exactly what Ukraine had planned. The Russians lit up the sky. Pantsir systems roared to life. Radar dishes swung hard onto the new contacts. Missile tubes popped open. $500,000 interceptors launched in pairs, glowing tails streaking across the darkness. The 30mm cannons stitched red tracers across the horizon in long, angry lines. Inside the Russian command post, operators were yelling, high-fiving, calling the swarm neutralized. They thought they were winning, but every Pantsir missile that flew meant 4 to 5 minutes of reload time per launcher. Every cannon burst burned through ammunition that could not be replaced in seconds. And in their enthusiasm, the Russians even scrambled their own Shahed drones as kamikaze interceptors, chasing Ukrainian decoys over their own territory like dogs chasing their tails with explosives strapped on. One Russian Shahed rammed a UJ-22 midair in a spectacular double fireball. Another clipped a decoy's wing, sending both spiraling down in flames. The Russian operators were celebrating. Ukraine's operators were grinning for an entirely different reason. The decoys had done their job perfectly. The real package was already threading through the chaos. With Russian attention locked onto the fireworks display above, the 20 Lyuty drones pressed their approach using a navigation system that was built precisely for this kind of contested environment. No GPS dependency. Instead, these drones ran on inertial measurement units fused with visual terrain matching algorithms. The onboard camera continuously compared the landscape below with satellite imagery stored in memory, piecing the puzzle together in real time, holding course through pure computational pattern recognition. It should have been enough, and for a while, it was. Then the Pole 21 grid shifted into a higher gear. The jamming intensified dramatically. Several Lyuty drones began drifting, 1 mile off course, 2 miles, creeping steadily eastward as the electronic interference overwhelmed their navigation solutions. Back in the Ukrainian control room, the atmosphere shifted from focused tension to something closer to controlled panic. Imagine driving a racing car through dense fog at 100 miles an hour, knowing there's a wall somewhere in the darkness and having no reliable way to know exactly where it is. That was the situation. Russian radar operators watched Ukrainian drones veering off target and reported back up the chain. Jamming is working, threat neutralized. In the Milarovo command building, confidence was building again. But here is the detail that changes everything about what comes next. Some of the Ukrainian operators weren't panicking at all. Some of them were smiling because the Pole 21, doing exactly what it was designed to do, had just walked straight into a trap that Ukraine had been setting for months. The jamming wasn't a problem anymore. It was about to become the solution. What Ukraine did next required two things that almost no military force in the world could pull off: recovered enemy hardware and the engineering brilliance to actually weaponize it against its original owners. In a previous operation, Ukraine had managed to capture intact Shahed drones before Russia could destroy them. Those drones went back to Ukrainian laboratories, where engineers tore them apart looking for anything exploitable. What they found was remarkable: functioning IFF transponders, identify friend or foe systems. the exact hardware that Russian air defenses use to distinguish their own aircraft and drones from enemy targets. And critically, those transponders were still broadcasting valid, current Russian authentication codes. Ukrainian engineers pulled one transponder, tested it thoroughly, confirmed it was still accepted by Russian systems, and then installed it on one of the Lyuty drones in the strike package. That drone was now approaching Milarovo, broadcasting a signal that translated to every Russian sensor in range as friendly Shahed returning to base for maintenance. Do not engage. When the Panzer operators saw it appear on their screens, something deeply human happened. They hesitated. The IFF code checked out. The authentication was valid. If they fired on a friendly aircraft returning home, the consequences would be severe. That hesitation, those few precious seconds of uncertainty, forced something even more valuable than a safe approach corridor. It forced the Russians to activate their full defensive grid at maximum emission power, frantically trying to positively identify the contact before committing to a shot. Every radar dish turned on, every electronic warfare node pumped out signals, every Pol 21 transmitter in the area went to full power. And in doing so, Russia had just illuminated every active sensor position around the target, including the precise location of the administrative command building near the oxygen and fuel station where Shaheds were being staged for launch. Ukraine had a name for this tactic, the Shahed Boomerang. Combined with what came next, it was about to end the base. Here is where the story crosses from clever military tactics into something that genuinely rewrites the rulebook on electronic warfare. The Pol 21 system, now running at absolute maximum output to protect the base from the transponder spoofing Lyuty, was broadcasting an electromagnetic signal so powerful, so consistent, and so directionally identifiable that it was essentially a beacon, a lighthouse screaming at full power in the darkness, pointing directly at itself. Ukraine had installed specialized receivers on a number of their Lyuty drones, receivers that ignored GPS entirely. Instead, they were tuned to detect the strongest jamming source in the surrounding airspace and then steer the drone directly toward it. The physics are almost poetic in their brutality. The louder Russia jammed, the clearer the signal. The more aggressively they tried to protect the base, the more precisely they guided the weapon straight into it. It was like giving a bloodhound an incredibly strong scent and telling it to run toward the smell rather than away. The Pol 21, the crown jewel of Russia's electronic defense architecture at Milarovo, had become the most accurate navigation system Ukraine had ever deployed over Russian territory. The response inside the Russian perimeter was frantic. Panzer commanders snapped out of their celebration mode the instant they realized certain drones had stopped drifting and were now flying with locked, purposeful precision directly at the heart of the facility. Alarms blared, turrets swung on hydraulic drives. The two A-38M autocannons spun up, spitting 5,000 rounds per minute, painting the night sky with orange tracers in long, furious streams. Two Su-35 fighters screamed down from altitude with afterburners roaring, diving steep to get below the cloud deck, but 400 feet above ground level, with ground clutter from trees, buildings, power lines, and wet farmland filling their radar screens with false echoes, they couldn't get clean locks. One pilot fired an R-73 heat seeker in desperation. It chased a thermal bloom from burning decoy wreckage miles away and disappeared. The Lyuty drones were already too low, too close, and too locked on to stop. In the Ukrainian control room, the operator stared at his camera feed with white knuckles. The target building grew in the frame. The home-on jam signal held perfectly, rock solid, making micro corrections for wind drift in real time with a precision that GPS at its best could never have matched, because the jamming signal was simply too powerful to lose. 90 seconds out, 60. The Panzer tracers were walking closer, almost finding the range. 30 seconds. Individual windows visible on the target building. 10 seconds. Panzer rounds finally found the correct elevation, fractionally too late. At 1:37 in the morning, the Lyuty impacted the administrative command building. The 165-pound warhead detonated on contact, And what followed was not just an explosion, it was a cascade. The blast ruptured pressurized oxygen lines running from the fuel station into the Shahed staging area. Aviation fuel bladders ignited, warheads stacked in the magazine cooked off, Shahed sitting on launch rails caught fire and burned like matches. Secondary explosions rolled through the facility in waves, sending fireballs hundreds of feet into the night sky. The administrative building collapsed entirely. The fuel station was destroyed. The launch infrastructure was buried under debris and fire. When the smoke cleared, Russia had lost an estimated 20 to 30% of its Shahed launch capability from the entire southern sector. Drones that would not fly for days, coordination that would not function without its command hub, pressure on Ukrainian cities that dropped measurably in the nights that followed. Russia had deployed its most advanced electronic warfare system, and Ukraine had used it as a precision navigation tool to destroy the facility it was built to protect. You genuinely cannot write irony with that kind of precision. So that is the full story of how Ukraine turned Russia's own jamming grid into a guided missile, and why this operation is going to be studied in military academies for years to come. The Shahed boomerang, the home on jam navigation, the IFF spoof, these were not lucky improvisations. They were the result of months of captured hardware, patient engineering, and the kind of creative tactical thinking that defines this conflict like no other in modern history. Now, here is what I want to know from you, and I mean this. Drop your actual analysis in the comments, not just a one-liner. Do you think this strike genuinely forces Russia to rethink how it deploys its Shahed hub network? Or does Moscow simply absorb the loss, build more facilities, push more production, and keep the nightly swarms coming? Because that answer matters enormously for what the next phase of this war looks like, and I want to hear where you stand on it. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, now is genuinely the right moment. Not because of some algorithm, but because we have more of these deep dive breakdowns coming, and they only get more intense from here. Every week on this channel, Laura Collins, we go places the surface level coverage doesn't. Hit subscribe, tap the bell so you actually see the videos when they drop, and I will see you in the next one. Stay sharp, stay curious, and as always, glory to the innovators.